My name is Alex. We're going to talk about drugs and alcohol today. We're going to talk especially about tobacco. Here's what I want to do. I want you to understand what a drug is. And all drugs have things in common with every other drug, and that's what makes them a drug. So I want you to know what is common from drug to drug to drug to drug to drug. I want you to understand very clearly the ways that drugs can be harmful to you. I mean, you've grown up hearing that drugs are bad for you. No one ever explained to you why. I want to try and make sure you understand why. Some people who use drugs will be unable to stop using drugs. That's actually a small minority of people. Most people who try drugs can leave them alone. But we know that some people, when they try drugs, continue to use them. They continue to use them even though it's causing them trouble. And when they try and stop, they can't stay stopped or can't stop. You need to understand why that is. You need to understand why it is that some people can get addicted, other people don't, and why those people who get addicted can't stop. Then we're going to spend some time talking about how do you know, or how could you talk to a friend, how could you teach your friends or your parents or somebody else if they could get this. In other words, if it's a disease, we're talking about addiction. After today, I would be really pleased if you could have the ability, if you had learned enough, that you could sit with one of your friends and say, today I learned about addiction is a disease, here's what the disease is, here's how you get it, here's why some people get it and others don't, and here's what you can do if you think you're getting it. And that's really what I want you to be able to do today. So today I'm going to teach you guys to be teachers, and my hope is that after this morning you'll find somebody, grab them, who's smoking, go, wait a minute, and teach them about what you learned today. Is that fair? Now, because some of this language may not be familiar to you, if I use a word you don't understand, or if I say something in some concept you don't get it, it's fair to say, what? Or something like that. Let me know if you didn't get it. Is that okay, Nick? Is that okay, Javier? Is that okay? Everybody understand? Because I'm not going to be bothered if you say I didn't understand that, or could you clarify that? Because the way I like to teach is I ask you questions and you answer them, and then I go back and forth with you. Don't be embarrassed if I ask you a question. If you get the question wrong, we'll just cut your head off. I mean, there's no problem. I mean, it's either you get it right or you're dead. No pressure. Okay, right? Okay. This is me, and Newly Treatment Center is where I work. I'm the medical director there, which means that I'm the doctor who sees people with drug and alcohol problems who come in and they're asking for help. We treat tobacco addicts, we treat Oxy, Vicodin, Ativan, heroin, alcohol, methamphetamine. You name a drug, we try and develop a way of helping people get off of them and stay off of them. And that's what we do at the center. And we would teach our patients the exact same things I'm teaching you. In other words, everybody who's interested in the disease, who might get the disease, who has the disease, they need to know, all need to know the same thing. I mean, how are you going to get well if you don't even know what's wrong, right? All right, let me show you the first slide. This is called the pleasure scale, the pleasure scale. We're not used to thinking of pleasure as a separate concept, but in fact, in each of your brains, there are two parts of your brains that when they're active, when those two brain parts are active, you feel good. They're called your pleasure centers. In a minute, we're going to talk about why you need pleasure centers. But first you need to know that there are pleasure centers. Now, if you look at the pleasure scale, what this means is that, let's say you've got these parts of your brain that are pleasure centers, and when they're active. So let's say as you sit here right now, you just feel okay. You're not high, you're not low, you're just okay. Now, there are things you can do to turn on your pleasure centers. And these are called natural highs, or simple pleasures. They're the kind of things you usually enjoy, the kind of things you like to do. So if you were here and you wanted to feel good, what would you do? What would you do? What would you do? Let's say you're bored and you want to do something, you want to feel better, what would you do?
To be truthful, probably go drink or something.
Go drink or something. Okay, and that'll guarantee you to work. How about that? What would you do?
Smoke a cigarette.
Smoke a cigarette, what would you do?
Smoke a bowl.
Smoke a bowl, okay? So you're in the normal range and you want to feel better, so you could do stuff to feel good. Now, if you weren't using drugs and alcohol, for example, here, you might just go for a walk or play a video game or watch a movie. So you're normal, but you want to feel better, so I say watch a movie. Now, if I turn your pleasure centers on a little more, in addition to feeling good, you'd start to get interested in things. If you're interested in something, your pleasure centers are active. So let's say you're interested in a good book or hearing what your friend has to say. In order for you to be interested in what your friend is saying, your brain chemistry for pleasure has to activate. And that's how you are allowed to be interested. Your brain chemistry is active and now you're interested. If you wanted to have more pleasure, you could have really good food or really good sex, or you could watch something that was really exciting. Now, the term euphoria means that your pleasure center is full on. It's full active. That's all the pleasure your brain can get. Most people don't get euphoria very often, and it's not something we experience that often. But say you are going to graduate from someplace, or you just got a big award, or you just finished an amazing project. It was really tough. You know that really excited, elated feeling like, wow, that's called euphoria. And it means that your pleasure centers are really turned on and are giving you a lot of pleasure. With me so far? We also know that your pleasure centers can be underactive. So for example, if you are in a bad mood, you didn't get any sleep, you feel negative. Any of you ever feel negative? Oh. Now if you had even less activity in your pleasure centers, you'd be bored. Notice that these are opposites, right? A little activity, you feel good. A little underactivity, you feel negative. Extra activity, you're interested. If it's too low, you're bored. So interest and bored are opposites. Pleasure has as its opposite this term, anhedonia. That means no pleasure. That means your pleasure centers lose the ability to generate a good feeling. And everybody, by the time they're your age, has gone through periods of life where there was no pleasure in your life at all. So you can remember times where it was just flat, boring, empty, just awful. The worst you can feel is the opposite of euphoria. And it's not like sad mood or depression, it's more like a bad mood. It's like, oh, what are you looking at? Don't look at me. I hate it when you look at me. You ever felt like that? That's called, That's called dysphoria. It's the opposite of euphoria. So, if you've ever been, have you ever been depressed? If you've ever been depressed, you know, because when you're depressed, you can't enjoy anything. So the time most of us have experienced anhedonia, no pleasure, is when we're really depressed. And that's, you can't enjoy yourself when you're depressed. And that's a common time for people to lose pleasure in their life. This is the system drugs work on. Drugs work on this system. Drugs vary in how strong they are. By strong, I mean how much pleasure can they give you. So if you look at this scale, the weakest pleasure stimulator is tobacco. And when you smoke tobacco, you feel good. And if you look at that good feeling, tobacco does more. It actually makes you feel alert, makes you calm, takes away your anxiety, makes your brain sharp. So it does a lot of things, makes you feel good. If you look at weed, it's strong enough to activate your pleasure centers so everything is interesting. You know how when you're high, everything's interesting, the back of your eyelids are interesting, your toenails are interesting, the walls are interesting, everything's interesting. I mean, that's what weed does. It takes things that are not interesting and makes them interesting. So it's strong enough so that if you're high, so for example, you don't like your class, you're hating it, you're just bored out of your tree. You know, if you do a bowl, Pretty interesting class. Of course, you might not remember anything, but it was an interesting class at the same time. Alcohol is strong enough to produce pleasure. It's a more powerful drug. And you know, if you've ever like had 2 or 3 shots, it comes on, you woo, you giggle and you laugh, you feel good. That's pure pleasure. Now, euphoria is unusual in sober life, but there are some drugs that'll give you euphoria every time you try. Anyone know what I mean? Meth. Meth will always give you euphoria, especially if you smoke it or if you shoot it. OxyContin, all the painkillers can give you amazing euphoria. Cocaine, especially if you smoke it or you shoot it, amazing euphoria. And some people, when they hear me say, wow, drugs give you pleasure, go, you're glorifying drugs. No, we're not. We just need to know what drugs do. And one of the things drugs do is they make you feel really, really good. That's what a drug is. So we're not saying use them to feel good. I just want you to know what drugs are, right? If things make you feel good. So you can actually get euphoria, say if you're a methamphetamine user and you smoke meth. Any of you guys know meth smokers? Any of you meth smoker? I mean, they can get euphoria 20 times a day. You know, they just take a hit off the pipe and boop, la la land, and they're just all over the place with terrific pleasure. Now, if that was what we knew about drugs, you take them into your body, they go into your bloodstream, they get into your brain, they reach the pleasure centers of the brain, they turn on the pleasure centers, and you get high. You get pleasure. High and pleasure mean the same thing. Now, if that's what we knew about drugs, why wouldn't we just stop and go get high? I mean, here's all this pleasure, why don't we just go get high? Javier, why don't we just go get high? I mean, think of it. 20 times a day, you could have maximum pleasure go off in your head. Boom, fireworks.
Because at the same time, it's ruining your life. So.
Why don't we just go get high? Not a bad answer, Javier.
Because it's just bad for you, and it like
Why?
breaks everything down, and before you know it, everything that you have is gone. And
Good
it hurts
answer.
your family and stuff.
Why don't we just go get high?
What happens when you have nothing else to get high on than much?
Ah, good answer. Y'all know people who use powerful drugs, right? The big ones, the euphoric ones. Are they dancing in the aisles and having a great time? What's wrong? No money, no home, plenty of pleasure, right? So you're all on the right track. I mean, obviously. If drugs were a free ride, we would just go get high. But we all know it's not a free ride. And one of the things that I think it's important to understand is, why are they bad for you? Why are they bad for you? If you look at this slide, I'll give you the answer why they're bad for you. Let's say you're using weed, or let's say you're using alcohol. You're using it, you're using it, you're using it. Eventually, you'll reach a point where the amount you're using doesn't get as high as it used to. Have you seen that happen? Have you reached that point yet? Where it takes more to get high than it used to? Have you seen that? So one of the problems with using drugs is the amount you used to use stops working, you need to use more. Now, if you reach that point and stop, you don't go back to normal. The thing to realize about drugs is once you've reached the point where you don't get as high as you used to and now you stop, the way you feel when you're not high is no longer the way you used to feel when you're not high. Here's the rule. You go as low as you got high. You go as low as you got high. So for example, if you look at tobacco smokers, you guys are experts on this, you feel good when you smoke. But when you stop smoking, you don't go back to normal. You feel negative instead of positive, right? If you're a weed smoker and you use it and you like weed, when you stop, you don't go back to normal. What do you get? Bored. You've all experienced this. You all know what I'm talking about. If you drink alcohol and you reach the point where the alcohol you used to use doesn't work anymore, you stop. You can't enjoy yourself. You lose pleasure. What are you going to do?
Drink.
Drink, that's the right answer. Okay, now if you're using drugs that produce euphoria, when you stop, keep in mind this fact. Dysphoria isn't tolerable. Nobody can stand being dysphoric. You've seen people coming down from meth. They're awful. They can't stand how they feel. They're out of their accord. And that's dysphoria. So they pay a really high price for the euphoria they got. Now, one of the things if you talk with a meth user, they love the high, but when they stop using, whoa, they go to the opposite of high. What do they want to do then? They're desperate to use. They're frantic to use, right? You've seen that? They're just going crazy to use because nobody can take this. Nobody can stand this. So, go a little further. Stand back. And the question I would ask you, why do we have pleasure in our brains? Why do we have pleasure in our brains?
To enjoy the things you like doing.
To enjoy things, to be interested in things. What else? Here's a good way of thinking about it. What if you had no pleasure? What would your life be like? Not fun. Okay, so if you ask a scientist why we have pleasure, scientists would say, well, it rewards us for going after food, going after sex, seeking people who will be kind to us. Let's see if I can give you a technical explanation. Let's suppose you were a worm, and I put you in a dish, and you were a hungry worm. And I put a little piece of food in the corner of the dish. Now, as you start to find the food in the dish, the pleasure centers in that worm brain would light up. And that lighting up would say, you found some food. And as you got closer to the food, you'd get more pleasure, like you're on the right track. You know that game, like you're cold, you're warm? So as you got closer and closer to the food, your brain would go, yeah, you're on the right track. When you finally got the food, the pleasure centers would go, hooray! And you get tremendous, yummy for the tummy, all that great stuff. Now, if I took a chemical and destroyed the pleasure centers of that worm, and I put a little piece of food in the dish, the animal would wander around the dish and couldn't find the food. It could bump into it and wouldn't know it was food because the signal that you found food wouldn't turn on. The worm would starve to death. So the pleasure centers, when it comes to food, is essential to live. You ever been hungry? What happens when you're hungry? You go after food. What if there isn't any food? You find food, right? So we have to do it. And the pleasure center, so if the pleasure center tells us when we're doing the right thing, moving towards stuff that are good for us, motivates us to get that good stuff. If you look at what the pleasure does, it rewards us for going after food and after sex and after being with people. That's what nurture means. We also know that if you're paying attention to something, that means your brain is found enough interest in it that you're paying attention. Is it harder or easier to pay attention to things that are interesting? It's a lot easier. Hard to pay attention to things that are boring. So the pleasure system, when it sees, say, a book or a really pretty girl or a boy or whatever you like, the pleasure center turns on, you pay attention to it, right? If you're enjoying yourself, let's say you go to a movie and it's so good, that means your pleasure center got turned on by watching a movie. You enjoyed it. That's what enjoyment means. If you look at monkeys, apes, orangutans, chimpanzees, humans, those are called social creatures, right? They run in packs. Animals that run in packs activate their pleasure centers when they're with people. Would you rather be alone or with people, Sadie?
With people.
With people. Would you rather be alone or with people?
With people.
Do you feel good when you're with people? That means that, like normal humans, you get pleasure being with people. And that's part of what makes social communities work. We like being with each other. We enjoy it. Say you get a good massage, or suppose you are just really in love, or suppose you're thinking about graduation or something. The pleasure you get from that means that your pleasure center's turned on. If you're interested in something, or how valuable, how important things are, In other words, if you stand back, the pleasure centers are active in all the different things we do. They're really active in the things that make it possible for us to live. That's the system drugs work on. Drugs turn on it and do all these things. Okay, here's a question. And I've already answered the question, so let me see if you got what I was getting at. Danielle, what's a drug? Tobacco, alcohol, weed, meth, coke, those are all examples, right? What are they? What do they do?
They get you addicted.
Not initially. You know, when kids are using drugs, hey, hobby, they want to get addicted? No. So that's not why people use drugs. Why do they use drugs?
To give you pleasure, make you enjoy it.
That's the answer. A drug is a pleasure-producing chemical. All drugs, to be a drug, to qualify as a drug, you have to be able to show that it makes you feel good. And all drugs make you feel good because they get to the pleasure centers and turn it on. That's what a drug is. And so instead of good food or good sex or a walk in the forest, you just take a hit off of whatever it is, goes into your blood, gets to your brain, gets to pleasure centers, boop, and you feel good. It's free. So drugs activate the system we've been talking about. Now, that sentence, the next sentence says drugs activate the chemical pathways in the brain associated with those feelings. So that's the definition of a drug. And as we said, some drugs activate a little bit, like tobacco, some of it maximal, like meth or oxy or something like that. But they all do the same thing. They do other things, but all drugs do that one thing, and that's what makes them a drug. This isn't just a theory. This is where it lives. In this slide, we take it, this is a rat brain. None of you qualify. This is a human brain. And what you've done is divide the brain, so you're looking at it from the side, okay? So like if we were looking at Sadie, we would be looking at her brain from the side. And if you look at it, deep in the middle of the brain, like really in the middle of the brain, is a part of the brain that kind of keeps an eye on what's going on in your body and in the environment. And something that's pleasurable, or could be pleasurable, this part of the brain picks it up and sends a signal to what we used to call the pleasure center. But we now know that there are two of them. One of them in the middle of the brain. And if this gets active, boy, you feel good. This is a new part of the system that was just discovered. This part of the brain right here, from here, anyone know what that part of the brain is? That's the part of the brain that makes decisions. That's the part of the brain that decides if you're going to do it or not do it. So one of the questions that we need to consider is how come you have a pleasure system? How come you have a pleasure center right in the middle of the part of the brain that makes decisions? It's a good question, isn't it? But there's a lot of information on this slide. Before I go through it, and there's three terms I want you guys to understand. And I want you to say them. The first one is called neuroadaptation. Say it. Neuroadaptation. Say it. Say it. Neuroadaptation. Second term is tolerance. Say it. Third one is withdrawal. Those three words are the problem with drugs. If someone comes up and says, why are drugs bad for you? The answer is neuroadaptation, tolerance, and withdrawal. Before I go through this slide, let me give you an example. Any of you ever been to a really loud concert? Have you? Have you stood near the speakers? What happens to your hearing?
Like it's hard to hear when you're.
What?
It gets hard to hear.
What? What? You hear what she said? She said now, in this example, she went to a loud place, she exposed her hearing to really loud noise, and like a lot of people, she realized afterwards she was kind of hard of hearing. And it came back after a while, so after a while, your hearing was okay. But you're absolutely correct. If you overdo it with loud sound for a period of time, you're hard of hearing. You had that experience? Now that's a very common observation. And here's what it means. Built into your brains is a really important protective step. And in the example I'm giving you, loud sound could destroy your hearing. So before that happens, your brain protects you from going deaf. And it protects you by becoming insensitive to sound. So that if you get too loud of a sound, your brain goes, oops, too loud, and your ears get protected by becoming partly deaf. And it'll come back after a couple hours. Now what you need to know is if she went to a concert more than 3 out of any 7 days, 4 or more days out of a week, that temporary protection would become permanent. She would have a disease of hearing. What's it called? Deaf. She'd have deafness, right? So let's start again. She goes to a loud environment. She gets exposed to loud sound. Her brain protects her hearing by basically putting mufflers on. And that, after the sound goes away, it'll come back. She's been protected. But if she does it over and over and over, that temporary protection becomes permanent. She now can't hear usual sound. She can only hear loud sound, right? You see where I'm going with this? Let's talk about drugs. Now, instead of loud sound, we're talking about loud drugs. And let's say, Javier, you went on a big drunk this weekend. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you were knee-walking drunk, barfing everything, the whole thing. Now, if you were paying attention, and we could measure it, if he drank, say, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, way too much, if we could measure it Monday, Tuesday, probably Monday and Tuesday, he would have trouble with pleasure. He'd have trouble with interest. He'd have trouble enjoying himself. He'd have trouble paying attention. He would be bored. He would be negative. He overdid it. Now, that decrease in pleasure after a weekend of drinking protects you. Now, if he got drunk more than 3 out of 7 days, 4 or more days, and he did it for 2 weeks, that temporary empty pleasure that would be the result of you drinking too much, that decrease in pleasure would become permanent. You wouldn't be able to hear your normal pleasure. You would be deaf to normal pleasure. Okay, take a second, guys. Imagine all the things you enjoy, all the things you love to do, the things that are fun, things you can't wait to do. Got it? Wipe them out. Imagine you could have none of that. It was gone. How you doing? You like that? Welcome to the first day of addiction. Because once you've become deaf to pleasure, you're not normal anymore. From that point forward, you're at least going to be bored. And worse than that, you may be very negative. You might feel no pleasure. So the problem with overusing drugs, you get a lot of pleasure when you use them. But if you overdo them, it takes away from you the ability to have any pleasure. And if you're in my office where I treat drug addicts and alcoholics, it's the saddest thing because they can't enjoy anything at all. At all, nothing. Nothing is pleasurable. Except what? When is it pleasure?
When they get that drug, right?
When they get high. So they come to depend on the drug, right? So let's start at the beginning. They're using, they wipe out their pleasure centers. Now they can't hear pleasure. The only time they get any pleasure is when they use the drug. But it's making it worse at the same time, right? So they're getting pleasure, but they're making it worse. So every single time they use, it's a bonk to the pleasure system. And when they stop, they don't go back to normal. They go the opposite direction. And it becomes the way they feel most of the time. And for those of you who smoke or who smoke weed or who've used a lot of alcohol or used pills, you know what it means to have no pleasure. I mean, you all know it. You've all been there. And it really is a difficult thing to go through day in, day out with nothing enjoyable. Been there? You been there? You been there? You been there? Do you like it? Did you know that? Did you know that drugs take away your ability to enjoy yourself? That you can eventually only enjoy yourself when you're high? Well, let me take you through the science, because the three terms we use, neuroadaptation, tolerance, and withdrawal, are the scientific terms for what we just talked about. If I was giving a lecture to scientists, I would say that if you overdo it, in other words, overstimulate your pleasure centers, that overstimulation would induce a change in your brain, and the name of that change would be called neuroadaptation. So in direct response to the loud pleasure, the repetitive, over and over and over pleasure, the brain regions become insensitive. They stop working. They become unresponsive. Your pleasure centers go deaf. And that is the big problem. That's called neuroadaptation. How do you know with one question whether your brain is normal or diseased? Now, I just introduced the term disease. Remember when we were talking about if you overdid your hearing over and over and over, your loss of hearing would become fixed, become permanent. You'd have a disease of hearing called deafness, right? If you overstimulate your pleasure centers, they go deaf. And the name of the state that you're in with a deaf pleasure center, that's called addiction. Addiction is a disease of the pleasure system. You get the disease by overdoing it, overdoing it, overdoing it. So how do you know with one question if your brain is normal or diseased? Anybody know? One question. Answers here. Sadie, what is it?
Try to enjoy something.
Well, that's true. Try and enjoy something, and you can't. You say, this is a drag. I need a drink. I need a bowl. I need to smoke. Because I can't enjoy myself unless I do. It's not what I'm getting at. With one question, how can you know if you have a disease of the brain or a normal brain?
When you have to keep losing more.
That's the answer. That is exactly the right answer. The amount, so if you use the example of sound, what you used to hear, you can't hear. And the only way you can hear is a louder sound. She just said it in the drug terms. The amount that used to get you high doesn't work anymore. She has to go to a louder dose to hear the high. Follow me? Follow me? So she's absolutely right. That's called tolerance. So if you want to ask your friends, you have a normal brain or a disease in your brain, ask a simple question, does the amount that used to get you high still get you high? If the answer is no, it takes me more to get high than it used to, you now know with medical fact, your brain has a disease in it. Now the thing that's a bummer about the disease isn't that it takes you more to get high. Yeah, you have to buy more weed to get high. That's not the point. The point is, everybody who needs more to get high doesn't feel normal when they stop. They go as low as they were high. So if you look at weed, you get high, you get interested. Wow, ooh, ooh, look at those. Ooh, that's very interesting. Ooh, it's my fingernails, want to see? Now, after a while, if I stop smoking weed, in other words, I have to get more, smoke more, smoke more. It used to be I could take a hit, now I need a whole bowl. Now I need 3 bowls, you know, whatever. If I stop, I don't go back to normal. I go the opposite direction. And from weed, I'll go into boredom. And the thing, I mean, I'm around potheads all day. I treat lots of potheads. And one of the things they all complain about is nothing is interesting. Nothing is interesting. Everything's boring. They can't pay attention. They don't enjoy themselves. They don't want to do anything. Everything's boring. They burnt out their pleasure centers.
You're used to having like the addiction so pleasurable to you. Once you're completely done, it's like you don't even know how to have fun anymore without it.
That is exactly 100% right. You can't have fun without it. You depend on it. The medical term for that's called a dependency. You've developed a dependency. That you can't enjoy yourself because you depend on the drug to enjoy yourself. You're absolutely right, Danielle. You get it. That's exactly right. So if we go back to the pleasure scale, it's what I showed you before. You're smoking, you're smoking, you're smoking. When you stop, you can't enjoy yourself. Now, I'm not saying you go to boredom. I'm saying you can't not go to boredom because the chemistry that will let you get interested is burnt out. You with me? So the sober state of someone who has developed tolerance to drugs, that sober state's not normal. It's the opposite of how they felt when they're high. The name for that is called withdrawal. So once you're tolerant and stop, you will always, 100% of the time, you will have withdrawal symptoms. And withdrawal symptoms are the exact opposite of what the drug does. So if the drug made you interested, you can't get interested. If the drug made you enjoy yourself, you can't enjoy yourself. If the drug makes you laugh, you can't laugh. If the drug made you sleepy, you can't sleep. If the drug made you high, you can't be high. And the dilemma for people who have developed tolerance to any drug is tolerating how you feel when you're not high. How do you tolerate the way you feel when you're not high? You like it? You like being sober?
Yeah.
You like being sober? Good. Do you notice a difference when you're sober over high? I mean, do you notice a difference in your interest level, your attention level?
Yeah, when I drink, I have a lot more fun.
How about when you're sober?
No, not at all.
Opposite. Bored. Well, that's the problem. Does everybody get this point? I mean, it is so basic. We really shouldn't go any further if you don't understand why drugs are bad for you. Drugs are bad for you because initially they make you feel good, but then they take away your ability to feel good by burning out the chemistry that makes you feel good. Any questions on that? We really shouldn't go further. If you don't understand, drugs are bad for you because they take away pleasure. You get pleasure today, can't have it tomorrow. If you overdo it today, you won't have any tomorrow. And it lasts a long time before you get it back. Long, 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 long time. Now, suppose somebody's burned out their pleasure centers and they don't like the way they feel when they're sober. Kelly, what thoughts come into their head? Sadie, what are they thinking about? Who knows what I'm getting at? Well, it's crystal clear the way you don't like the way you feel.
I'm trying to find more.
You're going to get high. So if you don't feel good, your brain says, yuck, I don't like the way I feel. Go get me some drugs. And it'll make you go get you your drugs. I'll prove it to you. So the problem for drug addicts is not getting high. It's being sober. Because drugs always make you high. You may need to use more. That's not the problem. That's a gimme. That's free. It's the damage they do to your pleasure centers. That's the problem for drug users. Did you know this? Did you know that? Is this new information?
Somewhat.
Okay. Is this new information?
Yeah.
Did you know that drugs burnt out your pleasure centers? You know what, you guys? You're experts on this subject. You are stone experts on this subject. You can describe what it feels like to not have pleasure better than anybody else. If someone asks you what's it like, you can explain if you knew what the question meant. So if you look at it, you use, your brain starts saying, whoo, too much, and starts the neuroadaptation process, starts going down. As soon as that happens, it takes you more to get high than it used to. And that's the sign that you have a disease of the brain called addiction. And anyone who's tolerant will always get withdrawal. Can't separate them. That means that without the drugs, there's this awful interference in the ability to enjoy yourself. And you just can't enjoy yourself. That's the problem. When they're sober, they get, what's anhedonia mean? No pleasure. They get anxious. They get angry. They're frustrated. And they get craving for the drug. The brain says, I don't like this. Get me some. That get me some is called craving. Okay? Now, in addition to pleasure centers, this is complicated. Let's use the example of alcohol, okay? I mean, alcohol is a pleasure-producing drug, right? Has another main effect. What is it? What else does alcohol do besides make you feel good?
Kills you slowly.
What?
Makes
Gets
you,
you drunk.
What's that mean?
you're not yourself. You can't stand.
Calms you down, takes away your logic, takes away your ability to coordinate yourself. It's a separate thing than feeling good. Alcohol has a side effect. It's a calming drug. Alcohol's a big calming drug. If it calms you too much, what do you get?
Sick.
Dead.
Blackout.
You can black out. That's too much. Keep on going, what do you get? Dead. So it can calm you really calm, calm you forever. That's called alcohol poisoning. Okay, so in addition to, let's take a person drinking. He loses his pleasure. You understand that, right? He also loses his ability to calm down because because alcohol stimulates the calming centers of the brain just like the pleasure centers. You overstimulate the calming centers, they neuroadapt. So if you look at someone who's a regular drinker, when they stop, they're not calm. They're shaky, they get sweaty, they can't sleep, they get anxious. What are you looking at? They get irritable, they get in a bad mood. They go to the opposite of calm. It sucks. It's horrible. You can't sleep, you get shaky, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your brain is spinning like crazy. Alcohol withdrawal has two main symptoms: no pleasure, no calm. So all drugs, in addition to making you high, do something else. What do painkillers do? Make you high, give you amazing pleasure, but they also keep you from relax you, take away any pain. Now, if you use enough to get diseased, how would you know that you've overdone, say, oxys?
When you're still in pain, you do it.
Good answer, that even though you're doing it, you're still in pain.
Getting more and more.
You need more and more, so the tolerance process has set in, right? So anyone who's tolerant to painkillers doesn't feel okay when they stop. They have terrible pain. I'm around pill addicts all day, every day. Boy, they hurt so bad. Their toenails hurt, their hair hurts, everything hurts. They can't calm down, they can't sleep, they're very, very anxious. Have any of you seen a pill person in withdrawal? Describe it. Danielle, describe it.
All jittery and talk slow, and then they stutter a lot. They don't really know what's going on. Sometimes they don't even care.
Are they in a good mood or a bad mood? Bad mood.
Sweaty and sick.
What do they want? And they're sick. They're vomiting, they've got cramps, diarrhea. What are they looking to do?
Next dose.
Find the next dose. They get desperate. Man, I'm watching these people all day get sick. I would do it. I couldn't go through that, man. I watch what they go through. It's awful. Did you guys know that I can make that sickness go away in 15 minutes? It's so sad that there's people all over the place going through that, and we could treat it. In 15 minutes, go away just like that. They don't have to go through sickness. What happens to people who keep going through the sickness? Do they want to keep trying? No. They what?
They just want to stay on the drugs so they don't have to get sick anymore.
They want to keep getting more and more so you
So they
pass the
feel like
sickness.
themselves.
That's right. You got it. So they damage not only their pleasure centers, they damage their pain centers. And when they stop, they don't have any pleasure, but they also hurt all over. So it's not just pleasure you lose. Whatever else the drug does, you lose that too. And that makes people desperate to use more. You guys have seen this. I'm not telling you something you don't know. You've seen this before. So this line says, in addition to the pleasure centers, every drug does its own thing. Calms you down, alerts you. Like meth doesn't calm you down, makes you alert. You ever seen anybody who's been a meth user when they stop? There's no alertness in them. They're like a limp noodle. They can't wake up, they can't get out of bed, they can't get up, they can't do anything. This is why drugs are bad for you. This is why drugs are bad for you. So let's start again. Javier, someone's using drugs. Let's suppose it's him. How could you tell if he was getting into trouble? Ask him.
Ask him.
With one question, what do you need to ask him? Anyone know? We're curious about the disease.
How much do you have to use to get high?
That's the question. Is it the same amount you used to use? Now, if the answer is no, I have to use more than I used to, you know now two things about him. One is that his brain is not normal now. It's a diseased brain. Maybe a little bit diseased, but it isn't normal. The other thing you know is he doesn't feel normal when he's sober. He doesn't like it. And it doesn't matter. You just don't like the way you feel. And it's always the opposite of what the drug does. Is that clear? So the magic terms, understanding drugs, is neuroadaptation. That's the name of what happens to your brain. The way you know you've neuroadapted is it takes more to get high than it used to. And if you need more to get high than you used to, you now know 100% that you will not feel normal when you stop. And there's no exceptions to that rule. And what we've learned is, if the feeling you get when you stop is bad enough, you will do what you have to do to get more drug to feel better. You will do it. And you won't be able to stop because you can't stand how you feel. And you will do what you have to do. I mean, I've been around addicts all day. And one of the things I hear from them all the time is, Doc, when you can't get drugs and you start to feel that way, dude, you do what you got to do. You're not going to sit there and feel that. You're not going to stay there. You're going to do what you have to do. You'll get desperate. And I've learned that people can do some amazingly, really out there things because they just can't stand it. You know, they steal, they lie, they do all kinds of things. With me? Any questions? Nick? Any questions? You will be quizzed. All right. This is the disease we're talking about. If I could define this disease in one word, okay, someone's damaged their brain pleasure centers, their calm centers, their pain centers, they've got the disease. How do we know they have the disease? In one word, what changes when somebody gets the disease?
Loss of control.
That's the answer. What does that mean? You can't control yourself. That means even if you shouldn't, you keep doing it. The whole issue in addiction isn't what you use or how often you use, it's whether you can not use. That's the problem. So the critical change in addiction is you lose the ability to control yourself. Do you like being told what to do? Do you like being ordered around? Do you? How do you feel when people order you around?
It just makes one do the opposite.
Makes you want to do the opposite. How do you feel when you get bossed around?
Not too great.
Do you feel it's important for you to be in control of yourself? Okay, you're not. Each of you has crossed a line so that you can't control yourself. You're not controlling yourself. Here's an image for you to think about. When you get the disease, you've used enough tobacco, weed, alcohol, I don't care what it is. You've used enough, bonk, bonk, bonk. You've damaged your pleasure centers. You've damaged your calm centers. You've damaged whatever you've done. At that point, you're not controlling yourself. Why do we know that? It's like, do you know what a parasite is, Kelly? Who knows what a parasite is? A parasite's like a worm. A parasite is an animal that lives off another animal. Sucks their blood or sucks their tissue, or, So a parasite gets in your body and sucks nutrition from you. When you get addiction, it's like a parasite gets into the pleasure centers of your brain. I call him the craving monster, like a big worm. He sits up in your pleasure centers, and he tells you what to do. He says, Javier, you don't like the way you feel right now. Go get me some dope. And what are you going to do? You're going to go get some dope. So every teenager that I know, and I respect this, teenagers have to learn to be in charge of themselves. That's something we have to do to become adults. All of us need to learn to be in control of our behavior. The problem with the craving monster is he doesn't care what you want. He's going to make you do what he wants or she wants. He's going to sit in that brain. And if you don't feed the craving monster, he's going to get hungry. Where's my dope? And what's it starts to feel like, Nick? What's he say? Get me some dope. Now, the thing that's nasty about the craving monster is he can make you think you're in charge when you're not in charge. The craving monster can fool you, and you'll think that you're doing what you want to do, but you're not. You're doing what the craving monster wants you to do. I can prove it to you. So once you cross the line into addiction, you're not in charge, you're not in control. You're just a kid with a worm in your head, and the worm is calling the shots, flipping the switches, making you do what he wants to do. So the first thing you know, first way you know that someone's got the disease, they need more to get high. They don't feel right when they're normal. And once that happens, they won't be able to stop. Now, control means there are times when you just shouldn't use. You know, you got to go to church. You don't want to get blottoed before you go to church. If you've crossed the line into addiction, you'll get blottoed and go to church. You'll do things you wouldn't otherwise do. There are times where you just only should have just a little bit. You know, you can only have a little bit. You don't want one beer. Instead, you get so drunk that you throw up in history class. That's too much. But someone who's crossed the line into addiction can't have just one. Once they start, they can't stop. Even though they need to stop. Oh, God, my mom's coming home in an hour. Let me have another beer. They just can't stop. So the whole issue in addiction is you can't control yourself. The craving monster controls you. You don't control your use. The craving monster does. Creepy. Now, another way we know that someone is an addict is called CUDAC, C-U-D-A-C. That stands for continued use despite adverse consequences. Adverse consequences means trouble. We know someone is an addict because they keep on using. It's causing them trouble. And the question is, well, if it's causing you trouble, why don't you stop? What's the answer?
It's too hard.
I can't. Or, I can stop. I talked with a guy yesterday. I can stop, no problem at all. But he can't stay stopped. A guy came in the office last week and he said, I stopped. Great, man, how long has it been? About 4 hours. You know, for that guy, I was really glad, actually, because he hasn't had 4 hours where he couldn't do it in a long time. So that was a big achievement, but it wasn't very long. Now, CUDAC is how you know how addicted someone is. So, you know, like with diseases like cancer, you know that with cancer we want to give really intense treatment to people where the cancer has spread, right, before it's local. So the worse the disease, the more heavy is the treatment, right? How do you know how addicted someone is? It's not by how much they use. It's not by how often they use. It's by how much trouble it's caused them. How much trouble has your use caused you?
What?
How much trouble has your use caused you?
A lot.
Give me an example.
Go to juvenile hall.
That's a big
go to
one.
House arrest.
That's a big one. Okay. Has your use caused you any trouble? Like what? So getting arrested, juvie, all that stuff. How about you?
Getting arrested, getting in a fight.
How about you? He hasn't caused you trouble. Okay.
So I was getting yelled at by my mom.
Well, I mean, that's a downer, being yelled at by your mom. Nick, has your use caused you any trouble?
I don't think so.
Don't think so? If it's caused you trouble, why don't you stop, Sadie? I mean, here, couldn't be that great. It's causing you trouble.
So good. Yeah.
Is it because it's so good, or because it's not so good when you're not high?
Because it's not so good.
Not so good when you're not high. I mean, everybody likes being high, right? But once you're tolerant and stop, you don't like the way you feel. That's why people go back to using. It's not to get high, it's to not be sober. Right? You guys are experts on this. You're experts on this. So the way we know how addicted someone is by they're continuing to use, it's causing them trouble, and even though everybody can point out the trouble, they keep on doing it. And the worse the trouble, the more addicted you are. That means you're going to need more fancy treatment to get well. Now, let's go back. You bunked your pleasure centers, you bunked your calm centers, you bunked your pain centers, you stop. You do not like the way you feel. The brain goes, I don't like this. And it sends out a signal to your body saying, fix this. Just like if you didn't have food, it would send out a signal saying, feed me. Have any of you ever been hungry? Craving is the exact same thing as hunger. Because if you look in brain scans of people who are craving a drug, you can't tell the brain scan of someone who's hungry from someone who's craving. The parts of the brain that are active when you're hungry are active when you're wanting to use. So if you want to know what a drug addict feels like, if they don't have drugs, they crave. They feel hungry for the drug. Hungry, right? Hungry for the drug. Sadie, are you a thief? Okay. You haven't eaten all day. How you feeling?
Hungry.
What kind of a mood are you in?
Probably a bad mood.
What are you thinking about?
Food.
Okay. 2 days with no food. No food, you want food. How you doing?
Probably pretty bad.
What are you thinking about?
Food.
Do you want to talk about your issues? No? What are you thinking about? Food. Okay, 3 days with no food. You want food, there's no food. You're walking through the 7-Eleven. Do you like Slim Jims? Do you like Cheetos? 3 days with no food. You're walking through the 7-Eleven. There's that bag of Cheetos. What are you thinking?
Oh my god.
Could you see yourself stealing?
Yeah, probably.
Could you? No, I don't think you're a thief either, but all of us know that if she gets hungry enough, she'll do what she has to do. So even though she's not a thief and she has good values and good morals, if she gets hungry enough, she'll break the rules. She'll break her own values. Drug addicts break the rules all the time. They have to. They don't have a choice in the matter. They have to do it because they're that hungry. You understand? So if you really understand craving, you understand why people keep going after drugs. I don't like being hungry either. And I know if I get hungry enough, I'm in a bad mood, I don't want to think about anything else, you know, I'm really not, and I'll do what I have to do because I just won't be hungry. Now, back in the olden days, we used to talk about denial. And you guys, since you've been in trouble with drugs, people will say, oh, Kelly's in denial. And that usually means someone refuses to admit that they have a problem. Are you refusing to admit you have a problem? No. So she's not in denial. She's not in denial. I mean, every drug user that I know, seriously, if they're being honest, will tell you, I know it's causing me some trouble. I mean, I know I shouldn't do it. And yet they keep on doing it. So the term denial no longer means I don't have a problem. What it means is that the part of the brain that controls your behavior went to sleep. The biggest problem for a drug addict is when craving builds up, your thinking goes down. Now, you guys can give me a million examples. If you use, you're going to test dirty, your PO's going to pick it up, you're going to get in trouble. Now, has that ever happened to any of you? Now, as you get closer to using, what happens to your brain? What's happening here? So let's say that you could get in trouble if you use, okay? If you use, you're going to go to juvie again. Got it? With me? Here it is. Oh, you can't have it because you're going to go, no, you can't have it. You're going to go to jail. Now, what are you thinking here?
Debate on whether I should take it or not.
Okay, but suppose that the craving monster goes, Danielle, what's she doing? What's happened to her brain? Nick, what's happened to her brain?
Giving in.
How? What's her brain saying?
You need it.
You need it. What else is it saying? You've been there. What is it? How do you talk yourself into it? What does it say?
If that was me, I'd just be like, forget my PO.
Me too.
Just give me a
I'd
bag.
rather feel good than
So the danger that you face, you're saying doesn't matter?
It matters in the long run, at the minute.
not really.
That's what's meant by denial. Everybody knows it can hurt you. You know you can get in trouble because it's caused you trouble before. But when it's in your face, it doesn't matter. You get caught up in it. Your brain says, oh, you know, maybe they won't test me this week. Have you had that thought before? Or You know, I think I could take in my friend's urine. Maybe I could bring in my friend's urine. Have any of you ever done that before? Do any of you have friends whose urine doesn't have stuff in it? That's a problem. I had a guy hand in a urine recently, and he says, I said, dude, this is not your urine. He goes, it's my urine, I swear to God, I swear on my mother's grave. I said, wow, you're pregnant, man. I said, congratulations, you're gonna have a baby. So, so denial is really the ability to talk yourself into it when you said you weren't going to do it. It's where you get hungry enough that it doesn't matter, or you begin making these stupid excuses, these dumb reasons why you'll get away with it. And if you really were thinking straight, you know you wouldn't get away with it. But at the time, you said it right, you get caught up in a moment. At that time, you know, you're not thinking about your PO or your urine test. I want to get high. And and a lot of people say your mind goes blank. Your mind goes blank. You just don't remember the trouble. You don't remember why you're not supposed to do it. You don't remember what's going to happen. Your mind goes blank. You're out, and when your mind goes blank, you lose your control. Because if your mind wasn't blank, you go, oh God, that's trouble. God, I don't want to go back to juvie, right? So you're out of control because your brain goes blank. It is the worst part of addiction. It is the worst part. People cannot see what they're doing. They just don't see it. They know if they, and you know, when they're thinking straight, they know, God, I can't use, I want to graduate, I don't want to, all this stuff. When it's in front of your face, none of those thoughts are in your head, right? They just don't come into your head. Afterwards, what do?
Start tripping.
Oh shit, oh no, God, wow, I shouldn't have done that. God, I'm in really trouble. But at the time that you were in front of the drug, you can't get those thoughts.
They
Those-
wouldn't come by. I just
There's a
Well,
yeah, let's
focus
go.
and like fun.
That's right. Now, there's new science where we can look into the brain using brain scans. And if you look at an addict when they're craving their drug, the part of the brain that uses your logic and remembers the trouble and makes decisions doesn't register. Not at all. It's like a black hole in the middle of your head. Your brain goes blank. And it's like you don't have any brakes anymore. You're just out of control. You're out of control. That's exactly what addiction means. So if you look at this, you're using drugs, you're using drugs, you're using drugs, you're using drugs, and you reach a point where you need more to get high. And then you stop and you don't like the way you feel when you're sober. Craving builds up, it 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 builds up. You do it. You lose control, even though you shouldn't. Then the trouble starts. And so you say, oh God, the trouble's starting. So you try and cut back. What happens when you try and cut back? The craving builds up. Here's the kicker. The craving builds up, blanks your brain. Just blanks your brain. You can't think. You've all had that happen to you. It's yucky, isn't it? It's horrible. And then everybody yells at you and guilt trips you, and, you know, but at the time that you did it, you were not in control of yourself. You just weren't. And it's sad. That's what the disease is. You can't control yourself even though it's hurting you, because when you stop, the hunger starts and the hunger blanks out your brain. That's the disease. Any questions on that? Danielle, what were you thinking?
Well, when you quit for like you did it for many years, you did the drug, but then you quit for a while because you're getting way too deep. So you try quitting for a while, and then once you feel like you're in the clear, and then you start again. But then I don't know, I get confused.
Very good point. Now, let me see if I got what you just said. Someone getting way too deep, they stop. And things perk up, they're doing better, you know, they kind of get back on their feet, lives get better. Even though they can look back and see it was really bad when they were out of control. Now they fought the fight and they're clean.
Like you're in the clear to do it.
You're in the clear, and then what's your brain start thinking? You just said it.
I can do it.
I'm in the clear now. The heat's off. I can, and the hope, I think, check me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people say, I'm not going to get deep this time.
I don't say that.
Say, this time I'm just going to, I'm not going to go that far down. What happens? You lose control and you get further down. So a cycle sets up. It's the exact same cycle. So you're using, getting way too deep. So this is not for me. So you pull back and you're doing great. I did it. I think I'm going to get high to treat myself. Pretty much. So it's a trap. It is such a trap. Did you guys know it was the most common reason in the United States why people die prematurely? Of all causes of death in the United States, this disease contributes to more deaths than any other cause. It's not just you guys, but a whole lot of people stuck with this disease. And it's going to kill half of them for the most part. All right, this is critical for you to know. And you guys actually know this already. Let's suppose someone says, I'm going to stop. We know that they'll go back to using because they start to feel bad, and that bad feeling will bring on craving. With me so far? Okay, so that's what everybody goes through. They do stop. They get off, they stop using. Now, scientifically, we know there are 4 reasons why somebody who stopped will go back. Someone's trying desperately to discontinue their use. There are 4 reasons why they'll go back to using. What's the strongest one?
Temptation.
What?
Temptation.
No. Temptation's craving. Craving and temptation mean the same thing. Hunger, temptation, craving mean the same thing. What's the strongest cause of craving?
To make you go bad?
What's the strongest cause of craving known?
Peer pressure.
When it's in your face.
Or just like on a silver platter to you.
Of course. I mean, you might want to stop. Everybody wants to stop. But if you go to a place where the drug is, can you not do it? Sadie? If you go to where the drug is, even though your life depended upon not doing it, what might happen? What might happen, Kelly?
I do the drug.
You do it. That's the problem. The name of that is called environmental cueing. Do I have a slide on that? Yeah. This is the most common cause of relapse. Half the time that someone tries to stop, they go back to using because the drug is around them. This isn't that hard to understand. You haven't eaten for a couple days. You go to a place and everybody's eating your favorite food, and they're porking out right in front of you, and they're offering it to you, but you can't do it because you're going to go to jail.
I'll take it anywhere I'll run.
You understand addiction. You understand it. So the biggest danger, so the name for the most common cause of relapse is called environmental cueing. This is not choice. Your brain shuts down and goes into automatic mode. You could be determined under life itself not to use. But if the drug is in your face, your brain will go blank, craving will build up, you'll do it. You have to do it. I was talking with a woman yesterday, a couple days ago. She really shouldn't use. I mean, she's in big trouble. And she's been sober for a while, and a friend came by with a drug, which is crystal. And she found herself, even though she couldn't do it, smoking crystal. So she was trying to explain it. She said, Alex, it was like watching a movie of somebody else. I watched myself do it like I was a damn robot. I couldn't stop. I knew I couldn't do it, and I just watched myself do it. That's creepy. That's where the craving monster completely took her over. And she could actually watch the craving monster. She could watch it, she watched her hands and her, brain do all the things that happens. She couldn't not do it. I felt so sorry for her. She knew, she's going to go to jail. But even knowing she could go to jail, she knew it, it's crystal clear, even knowing that, when the drug was in front of her, she lost it. Danielle, suppose someone wants to stop using drugs. What's the first thing they have to do?
Get away from it.
That is the answer. No one gets off drugs if people around them are using it. And the first thing you have to do is get away from the drug. hard to do with tobacco, hard to do with weed, where every place you go, people are puffing on the bowl or on a doobie. I mean, it is very, very, very hard to not get triggered because every place you go, people are offering you the damn drug.
Even the certain smell.
The smell of it, going in the room where you used it, even just to think about it. You know, like if you're going to go to a party, you're going to have a good time. You know, before you get to the party, you're like already excited and stuff. And like, woo. Well, that's the way people feel when, as soon as they start thinking about the drug, it's like, wow, wow. That's not automatic. I mean, that's not voluntary. That's the craving monster going, ooh, I'm going to get fed. I'm going to get some dope. And it's gotcha. So this is the worst cause of craving known to science. And it literally will take you over. It literally, and about half of the time that people trying to stop use will relapse because somebody offered them a drug, or they smelled it, or they saw somebody who they used to use with, or their connection called them on the phone. You know, I got some really good sense, guy. You know, and you're going, oh. Next thing you know, you're out the door, even though you shouldn't, right? So environmental cueing is fair. What's the second most common cause of craving? Now, I want you to remember 4 letters, EWMS, humus, EWMS, say it. Okay, those letters, EWMS, stand for the 4 reasons why someone trying to stop will relapse. First is being around it. The second is obvious. You've all experienced withdrawal, and when withdrawal gets bad, what do you want to do? Use, of course. So as soon as you go into withdrawal, whoo, you will use. The third reason why someone will use is because drugs do more than make you high. If you're anxious, don't use drugs. It'll take away the anxiety. It'll do more for you. If you're depressed, don't use drugs. Why? Because it'll take away the depression. If you're bored, don't use drugs. Why? It'll take away the boredom. In other words, for some people, drugs do more than make you high. They know it does more than make them high. They don't like being bored. They don't like being sad. They don't like being anxious. So the drug takes away those things. So there are 2 answers to the question, why should somebody with boredom or depression or anxiety not use drugs? The first answer is it'll work. It'll do more for them. They know it right off the bat. I'm around potheads all day, and they say, Doc, when I first smoked, it was like the lights went on in my head. This is the way I'm supposed to feel. I love this. This is for me. And it's true. They really feel better. They think better. It really works for them. Then what happens? They get tolerant. Then what happens? They need more and more and more. Then they stop. What happens? Much worse. So it sets up the cycle of you have to go back, and you have to go back to more, and you have to go back. So the first answer to the question, why should a bored or anxious or depressed kid not use drugs, is because it'll work. Now, if you understand that drugs damage the brain chemistry that they use to make you high with, what's the second reason why a bored kid, anxious kid, or depressed kid shouldn't use drugs?
It's going to get worse.
That's the answer, Javier. It worked at first. As soon as they get tolerant to it, whatever it did for them at the beginning is now worse. It's what we call a biologic trap. Understand that concept? It worked really well up front, so you liked it. Then it got tolerant, and now you're trapped. Because if you stop, those original symptoms are going to be so much worse. You all know exactly what I mean. You've all had problems that when you stop, you did not like the way you felt. And if it was depression or anxiety or boredom, God, you're going to smoke, you're going to use, and it will work. Quickly, almost immediately. You come to depend on the drug, not to be anxious, not to be depressed, not to be bored. You can't function without it. And if you don't have the drug, you really have a lot of bad symptoms. You know those people. Some of you are those people. So having a mental health problem traps people in drugs. Ooh, God, it does. It is horrible. So, and it's so sad because they really do feel so much better when they first use. But so fast, the drug turns on them. Now they're trapped because if they don't smoke, the depression comes back, the anxiety comes back, the boredom comes back, they can't take it. When they finally go back to using, it's such a relief. Whew. But now it's continuing to hurt them and hurt them and hurt them. Then they stop. God, they can't stand how they feel. You see the trap? You see the traps? Everybody see what I mean? Works good at the front end, bad at the back end. Helps at the beginning, destroys at the back end. That's the problem with drugs. They work too good for some people, but then they trap you because without the drug, you cannot feel okay. Am I making sense? Does this apply to you? Kelly? Sadie? All right. Now, the fourth cause of craving, you guys are experts on. One of the most remarkable things about people who get addicted is they are very sensitive to stress. They get upset, they need to use. They get down, they need to use. They get angry, pissed off, lonely, they need to use. They get overtired, they need to use. Addiction is one of the most stress-sensitive conditions known to medicine. You can't, if you're an addict, you can't get upset without wanting to use. And if you look at this, we know the environment makes you want to use withdrawal. Once you're addicted, to be upset is to need to use. That's why that says stress equals craving. Addicted people don't get to be stressed. They get to be hungry to use. So built into, especially tobacco. Ooh, boy. Once you're addicted to tobacco, you are very stress sensitive because it relieves stress, just like that. And then if you don't smoke, how's the stress? Worse. So you smoked, it's what a relief. Then you didn't smoke. Guys see the trap? Horrible. I know. Deeper every time it's deeper, deeper, deeper. So whenever you guys are thinking about not using, before you do that, you need to make sure that you consider in your environment who's using, whether you can manage how you're going to feel when you stop and get past it, whether or not you're going to fall into a depression or start having panic attacks or something. Or if you get stressed, I don't care, you're going to rush for your drug. You're going to, because when you get upset, this disease, the craving monster can't stand being stressed. And if you get stressed, the craving monster is going to jump up and down, start screaming, and make you go get some drugs. You will dance to the craving monster's tune, I guarantee you. Afterwards, you know, you'll say, God, I had to. I was so upset I couldn't function. You get the point. Okay, why don't we take I guess we have a couple more, so I'm going to take a break for a couple minutes, but let me just finish these few slides. Question comes up. I'm going to give you some numbers first. In America, 94 out of 100 people try things that are known to cause addiction. In America, almost everybody is at risk for becoming addicted because almost everybody at some point, usually it's adolescence, you know, teenage years, but everybody tries something, tobacco, weed, something. If you follow that group of people, 94 out of 100, all of whom tried a substance that can lead to addiction, if you follow that group, what you'll see is that only about 1 in 5 of them ends up addicted. So everybody tries it, but only 1 in 5 gets the disease. Is that just bad luck? Or is there something about the people who get addicted compared to the ones who don't? Let me answer the question. There are definitely very obvious reasons why some people get addicted and others don't. And one of the things that if you're going to be teachers to other people to explain to them what addiction means, everybody needs to know whether or not they're one of the people who's going to get it if you do it. That's critical. How do you know if you can get it or not? Well, if you look everybody who tries the drug, if they do the drug right, they like it. Like, ooh, this feels good. The next time they do it, let's say that you're a shy girl, and you don't know a bunch of people, you get invited to a party, and you're kind of shy. Someone gives you, say, a drink, and your shyness goes away. Right? That'll happen, right? If you're shy, you go to a party, have a drink, you're not shy anymore, you're the life of the party, you're giggling and stuff. What are you going to do the next time you go to a party? You're going to want to find it. You're going to look for the person who has something to drink so that you can relax. Now, something happens between wanting it and needing it. Danielle, what happened?
You don't just want it, you need it. Just
Why? What happened? Nick, what happened?
You grew taller.
You get tolerant. Once you're tolerant, you need it. You are depending on it. You can't function without it. So the magic line between wanting it and needing it is when you get tolerant. Because now, in addition to liking it, there's something else pushing you. What is it? The way you feel when you stop. And it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. The saddest thing is, you eventually reach a point where you can't go to a party. You wouldn't even think of going to a party unless you got something to drink first. You require it to function. You're completely dependent. So this is the magic line. Now, if I was watching somebody, we would see they're getting more and more out of control with their use. Used to be she'd go to a party, she'd have a beer. 3 months later, she's packing away a sixer. Her use is getting more and more out of control. What we now know is if we could measure it, every time she went sober, she'd go to the party, how would she feel at the party? Bored. God, these people are jerks. God, I hate being around partiers when I'm not partying. These people are so stupid. I need to get stupid too. So you get out of control, and when you're sober, you feel worse and worse and worse. This is a trap. This is the trap we're talking about. So here's a question that we're going to look at before we take our break. Everybody who gets addicted had to overuse drugs first. Is that clear? To get the disease, you had to overdo it to injure your brain chemistry. So everybody who's an addict was first a substance abuser. And that meant, usually for alcohol, that means they drank more than 3 out of 7 days. They smoked more than 3 out of 7 days. They used. So at that point, they're called a substance abuser. So they've gone beyond just sitting around having a beer, sitting around smoking a bowl. They're really using large amounts. They're getting pretty intoxicated. Now, we know that they turn the corner into addiction when they get tolerant, they need more to get high than they used to. And you said it a minute ago just right. They're bored when they don't use. It's exactly right. They're aware of it too. They know it. So for a substance abuser, they need to understand what they're headed for. We need to help them understand and motivate them to stop. Once you're an addict, you can't stop unless you get help. Here's a news flash. The help that we can give now to people with addiction really, really helps. It used to be it wasn't so great. The treatment was kind of hit or miss. It's not that way anymore. If you came in, say, coming off of oxy or alcohol or tobacco, you'd be a miserable person. The very first thing I would do would be to treat your misery. And I can do it for any drug now. Oxy, alcohol, weed, meth, any drug makes you feel horrible when you stop. And that horrible feeling makes you want to go back to using. We can now treat that in virtually every drug. No one needs to suffer anymore. I'll go further than that. If you look at oxy, alcohol, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, somas, every single time you go through withdrawal, the next time it will be worse. And if you go through withdrawal then, the next time will be worse. Withdrawal is an injury to your nervous system. The effect of going through withdrawal is your nervous system gets sensitized. And the effect of being sensitized is that withdrawals get worse and worse and worse. was the first couple times you ever went through withdrawal? Was it a big deal? Is it better, the same, or worse after more withdrawals?
I think it gets a little bit easier because you know what you're going to deal with, even if it's going to be.
So you have an idea of where it's going to be.
Probably in the beginning, it's not so hard because you're not like you don't need as much because you just started. But then later on down the road, you need more and more, so it gets way harder.
And then what happens when you stop? Here's the question. Scientifically, we know that withdrawals make withdrawals worse. Have you seen it? That's the question. If you've seen it, you're just saying what science knows. I mean, most addicts have figured this out. The first few times they stop, no big deal. But unfortunately, if they go through that withdrawal without help, without medicine, they're actually injuring themselves. So that the next time they stop, it'll be so much worse. And after that, it'll be much worse. Eventually, I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. You know people who refuse to stop. They just can't stop. They won't stop because they can't go through it again. They won't go through it again. To me, that's very sad because we can prevent sickness now. And I know kids all over the place who won't stop, can't stop because they're not going to go through that again. Have you heard people talk like that? I have. It's so sad because they don't have to go through it. Shame on us for not allowing people to get treatment for withdrawal. Because if withdrawal is bad enough, you'll use. And we can stop it cold. So I get angry when I know it doesn't happen. This is a picture of tolerance. And on this slide, I've outlined the way tobacco works. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, tobacco smokers wake up. What's the first thing they think about? Cigarette. So you have that first cigarette. You know how you hear the blood rush in your ears? Whoo! The first cigarette and a half is actually the only time in the day you really get high. Because if you look, notice that the first few times, above this gray line, you get high, okay? So you get high, and then the next cigarette you get high. And notice you're not getting so high, so that by noon, if you don't, you're hardly getting high at all. But if you don't keep smoking, what happens? You go into withdrawal. The only time you feel okay is when your nicotine levels are in the gray zone. So to be above the gray zone, you get high. When you go below the gray zone, you go into nicotine withdrawal. Tobacco smokers go into nicotine withdrawal about once an hour. And the only time they actually get relief is right after they smoke. Now in the morning, you still get the buzz, still get alert, still get calm. But by the middle of the day, it isn't doing anything for you. Why do you keep smoking?
It calms you.
Because it calms you. Because if you keep going, you're not getting high, but if you don't keep smoking, what happens?
Then you start freaking out.
Start freaking out. So after you get high in the morning, you spend the rest of the day preventing yourself from feeling bad. What a crappy drug. Doesn't even make you that high. And you spend all day getting out of withdrawal from it. What a cheap drug. Everybody understand this? So above the line, you get pleasure, alertness. As long as your nicotine levels are in there, you're okay. But as soon as it falls too low, you go into withdrawal. And you now get the hunger and you have to use. So tobacco smokers spend all day after the first few cigarettes in the morning treating nicotine withdrawal. Crappy drug. For our break, just some numbers about tobacco. If you look at America, 3 out of 4 people try a cigarette at least once. Those are called people who ever smoked. Now, of people who ever smoked, about half of them will become daily smokers. Of people who become daily smokers, 1 in 4 of them will be totally addicted. If you take people who become daily smokers and people who are addicted, half of them will die of tobacco. It's one of the most fatal addictions. Kills about half the people who get it. So this is a bad disease. It's the most common cause of preventable death in the world. It used to be just in America, but the tobacco companies are now selling tobacco all over the world. And it's the fastest rising addiction in the world. It's the most fast rising cause of death in the world. So of people who try a cigarette, about half of them will die from tobacco. Yeah.
How come females lose more years than males?
Good question. I'm not sure I know the answer, but it's true. Female smokers get sick sooner, they get worse sickness, and they die more soon than male smokers do. It's true with other drugs, too, that there are differences between males and females and who gets the worst case. But women shouldn't smoke because they're far more likely to be unable to get off. If you look at treatment of addiction for tobacco in men and women do much less well. Now, that's not to say that we can't do it now that we know the reasons for relapse. Okay, Danielle, okay, Nick, you tell me. Let's suppose someone's a nicotine smoker and they want to stop. That's because, let's say they went to the doctor and the doctor did an x-ray and saw something on their lungs and, God, maybe it's cancer. That person needs to stop, right? We know there are 4 things that will make him keep smoking. Being around it, withdrawal from it, a mental health problem like boredom or depression or anxiety, or getting stressed out. How would you help them?
Give him a cigarette.
How about if you wanted to help them not die? Anybody, what would you do?
Not smoke around him.
You wouldn't smoke around them. Good for you, man. That is an A+. The nicest thing, no, wait a minute. The nicest thing you can do to somebody trying to stop, don't use around them. I mean, that's kindness. I'll give you a hint. You can tell a real friend. You know a true friend. A true friend wouldn't hurt you. And if you're trying to stop and someone's offering you their drug, I don't care what you say, that is not a friend. That's not a friend. That's what we call a drug friend. And they're not the same as friends. The real friend wouldn't hurt you. So if you want to know who your friends are, in one question you say, would you please not smoke around me? I'm trying to stop. And someone who cares about you, loves you, honors you, holds you in their heart, they won't smoke around you. They're trying to help you. Someone who doesn't have that value of you, they could care less. They will hurt you because the main reason why you won't stop smoking is they're puffing on it in front of you. So you can sort your friends right away. That's a good answer. I mean, so the first thing that someone has to do to stop smoking is don't be around smokers. Your parents smoke? Your parents smoke? Kelly, your parents smoke? Your parents smoke? Your parents smoke? Chances of you getting off tobacco just fell about 50%. Okay, so Nick, I'm your dad. You just got found to have an x-ray with possible cancer. You need to stop smoking, right? Right? I'm your dad. Hi, Nick. How's school?
Great.
Yeah? Want a cigarette? Could you get my matches for me, dude? Could you get my pack of cigarettes for me, man? You can have one. I mean, just take one off the top. Don't tell your mama. Could you get me a cigarette? What are the chances that he's going to be able to get off tobacco? Very poor. Okay, your life depends on it, Nick. Your life depends upon you not smoking. Got me? Okay, I'm your dad. Hi, Nick.
What's up, Dad?
Hey, Nick. Want a cigarette, dude?
No, I'm okay. I might have cancer.
Big deal. We ought to go sometime, dude, you know. I don't think about it myself. What does he need to do?
Can you please not smoke around me?
That's what he needs to do. Javier got it right. It's the hardest thing in the world to do. It may be the hardest thing you ever do in your life. You need to be able to say, I love you, I care about you, you're my dad, I want to be in a family with you, if you really, really care about me, please don't smoke around me, please, please. And if he loves you, he'll honor that. It won't be easy for him. But if he loves you, he'll understand that, God, he's going to have to do his part. And that's how you know who your friends are. I swear to God, that's right off the bat, you will know who's going to help you and who isn't going to help you. That is exactly the right answer. You got it. Want a job? We have a counselor in my office. All right, why don't we take a break? And when we come back, I want to teach you guys how to tell where you are in the process. There's a very simple experiment that we can teach you to do. And if you're going to be teachers of other people, because I'm asking you to be teachers of other people whom you know, you need to know how to teach them to do an experiment that will tell them if they're addicts or not. Okay? All right, copy. My name is Alex. We're going to talk about drugs and alcohol today. We're going to talk especially about tobacco. Here's what I want to do. I want you to understand what a drug is. And all drugs have things in common with every other drug, and that's what makes them a drug. So I want you to know what is common from drug to drug to drug to drug to drug. I want you to understand very clearly the ways that drugs can be harmful to you. I mean, you've grown up hearing that drugs are bad for you. No one ever explained to you why. I want to try and make sure you understand why. Some people who use drugs will be unable to stop using drugs. That's actually a small minority of people. Most people who try drugs can leave them alone. But we know that some people, when they try drugs, continue to use them. They continue to use them even though it's causing them trouble. And when they try and stop, they can't stay stopped or can't stop. You need to understand why that is. You need to understand why it is that some people can get addicted, other people don't, and why those people who get addicted can't stop. Then we're going to spend some time talking about how do you know, or how could you talk to a friend, how could you teach your friends or your parents or somebody else if they could get this. In other words, if it's a disease, we're talking about addiction. After today, I would be really pleased if you could have the ability, if you had learned enough, that you could sit with one of your friends and say, today I learned about addiction is a disease, here's what the disease is, here's how you get it, here's why some people get it and others don't, and here's what you can do if you think you're getting it. And that's really what I want you to be able to do today. So today I'm going to teach you guys to be teachers, and my hope is that after this morning you'll find somebody, grab them, who's smoking, go, wait a minute, and teach them about what you learned today. Is that fair? Now, because some of this language may not be familiar to you, if I use a word you don't understand, or if I say something in some concept you don't get it, it's fair to say, what? Or something like that. Let me know if you didn't get it. Is that okay, Nick? Is that okay, Javier? Is that okay? Everybody understand? Because I'm not going to be bothered if you say I didn't understand that, or could you clarify that? Because the way I like to teach is I ask you questions and you answer them, and then I go back and forth with you. Don't be embarrassed if I ask you a question. If you get the question wrong, we'll just cut your head off. I mean, there's no problem. I mean, it's either you get it right or you're dead. No pressure. Okay, right? Okay. This is me, and Newly Treatment Center is where I work. I'm the medical director there, which means that I'm the doctor who sees people with drug and alcohol problems who come in and they're asking for help. We treat tobacco addicts, we treat Oxy, Vicodin, Ativan, heroin, alcohol, methamphetamine. You name a drug, we try and develop a way of helping people get off of them and stay off of them. And that's what we do at the center. And we would teach our patients the exact same things I'm teaching you. In other words, everybody who's interested in the disease, who might get the disease, who has the disease, they all need to know the same thing. I mean, how are you going to get well if you don't even know what's wrong, right? All right, let me show you the first slide. This is called the pleasure scale, the pleasure scale. We're not used to thinking of pleasure as a separate concept. But in fact, in each of your brains, there are two parts of your brains that when they're active, when those two brain parts are active, you feel good. They're called your pleasure centers. In a minute, we're going to talk about why you need pleasure centers. But first, you need to know that there are pleasure centers. Now, if you look at the pleasure scale, what this means is that, let's say you've got these parts of your brain that are pleasure centers, and when they're active. So let's say as you sit here right now, you just feel okay. You're not high, you're not low, you're just okay. Now, there are things you can do to turn on your pleasure centers. And these are called natural highs or simple pleasures. They're the kind of things you usually enjoy, the kind of things you like to do. So if you were here and you wanted to feel good, what would you do? What would you do? What would you do?
To go
Let's say you're bored and you want to do something. You want to feel better. What would you do?
to be truthful, probably go drink or something.
Go drink or something. Okay, and that'll guarantee you to work. How about that? What would you do?
Smoke a cigarette.
Smoke a cigarette. What would you do?
Smoke a bowl.
Smoke a bowl. Okay, so you're in the normal range, and you want to feel better, so you could do stuff to feel good. Now, if you weren't using drugs and alcohol, for example, here, you might just go for a walk, or play a video game, or watch a movie. So you're normal, but you want to feel better, so I say you watch a movie. Now, if I turn your pleasure centers on a little more, in addition to feeling good, you'd start to get interested in things. If you're interested in something, your pleasure centers are active. So let's say you're interested in a good book or hearing what your friend has to say. In order for you to be interested in what your friend is saying, your brain chemistry for pleasure has to activate. And that's how you are allowed to be interested. Your brain chemistry is active and now you're interested. If you wanted to have more pleasure, you could have really good food or really good sex, or you could watch something that was really exciting. Now, the term euphoria means that your pleasure center is full on. It's full active. That's all the pleasure your brain can get. Most people don't get euphoria very often, and it's not something we experience that often. But say you're going to graduate from someplace, or you just got a big award, or you just finished an amazing project. It was really tough. You know that really excited, elated feeling like, wow, that's called euphoria. And it means that your pleasure centers are really turned on and are giving you a lot of pleasure. With me so far?